Brian Gorg, how you doing?
Buddy.
Hi.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for being part of this panel today. And we really look forward to having the next 30 minutes to discuss a topic that's always on the forefront of decision makers' minds as they're deciding how to either create or improve their digital signage networks. Today, I have Jacqueline Hoffman with MVix, Rich Ventura with Sony, and Ken Goldberg with Real Digital Media. And so thank you all very much for joining us today on this. In fact, we're going to try to get right into this and go quickly. So I'm going to ask you a question at first and then ask you to introduce yourself at the same time, if that's okay. And Jacqueline, we're going to start with you. So please introduce yourself and just briefly describe for our audience who may be very familiar with this, what a media player does in digital signage, sort of your Cliff Notes version. Jacqueline, I think we're having a hard time hearing.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Right. We can. It was brilliant what you said before, but why don't you start over?
No worries. Sorry, y'all. Again, my name is Jacqueline Hoffman. I'm a senior solutions consultant with MVix. Prior to joining MVix and leaping into the digital signage industry, I have experience in marketing and interior design. For those of you who don't know what a digital signage media player is, really it's the boots on the ground of the digital signage deployment. It's normally a small, slim factor computer. We call them boxes in our industry that help cache and render back content. You've probably noticed some common names like those of us in the webinar here today. And normally these are also going to be wired connected. So Ethernet connected into the internet to help receive signals and content from the digital signage software program. And again, keep in mind that you want to use something like a box instead of a stick. It just offers a little bit more RAM and storage. So again, really at its core, a digital media player is the physical device that's rendering back the content on the display screens.
Great, Jacqueline. Thank you very much. And we have our first bit of controversy, box versus stick. And so we're known here for having controversy. So thank you so much for interjecting that already. Appreciate it. RV, aka Rich Ventura, is from Sony. Rich, you look very well rested today. And congratulations on that. Why don't you introduce yourself and briefly describe the various types of media players in common use these days?
Let's try this again. Rich Ventura, Vice President of B2B for Sony. Also a former chairman at one point for the DSF, so obviously heavily involvement in the industry from that perspective. When we look at media players, it's all based on use case. It's all application based. You can have a simple screen that might just, all you're doing is saying hello, which could run with a stick, but it's simplistic in nature. And then you start adding things like system on a chip where they're embedded, and then you start getting into externals and OPS and SDM and servers. There's such a wide spectrum. It really comes down to, and this is where my controversy will throw with Ken, is it's all application based. 90% of the solutions out there, there's not a silver bullet for it. It's really going to depend on what you need. You're doing heavy content, you need a powerful, robust device. You need an Intel-based processor, or you need a very special purpose-driven ARM or different types of Android operating systems. All this stuff plays into it, but it all comes down to purpose-driven. And it also comes down to what the software needs in the end. So we can't say there's a perfect solution, but there are solutions that are going to fit for your needs. The last thing I'll just throw out there is long gone is a day where we said you needed a server rack room in the back to do all this work. The computing has gotten a lot stronger. When you look at Intel NUC's operating platforms and you look at some of the small boxes that are out there and the OPSs and SDM, they've become so much more powerful that we don't need to dedicate a room just to power 3 screens anymore like we used to.
Great. And I think we'll keep coming back to that idea of being purpose-driven. So thanks for that, Rich. Ken Goldberg, also a former chair of the Digital Signage Federation with Real Digital Media. Please introduce yourself and briefly talk about, in a broad sense, sort of the primary functionality one should look for in a media player.
Thanks, Brian. Can everybody hear me, or am I muted? We're okay? Okay.
You're good.
Thanks. I'm Ken Goldberg. I'm CEO of Real Digital Media, a StrataCache company. I've been in the industry since April of 2004. One may question that career choice, but whatever. I'd also mention, I believe that's a Pete Rose shirt behind you, Rich, is it not? Is that a Pete Rose jersey? He once flipped me off in the Montreal. He once flipped me off in the Montreal airport, so that's my Pete Rose story. But anyway, we're here to talk about media players and not baseball. And Brian, you asked some of the primary functionality of media players, and I think, Jacqueline, you kind of hit it. A media player is like a well-trained dog and not a child, because it does what it's told. So fundamentally, it's all about storing and rendering content, or rendering content, sometimes storing it, sometimes streaming it. You'll want to have some element of networking. A significant number of networks connect to the internet via Wi-Fi. We all would love them all to be wired because it's more reliable in so many ways, but that's not the reality everywhere. These are nodes on networks, so remote management of the device is super important. They often run 24/7. You need to be able to understand disk utilization and temperature and everything in between. You might want to look at how do we handle content anomalies or any other kind of hiccup, and by that I mean a hardware watchdog versus a software watchdog. For handling any kind of unrecoverable errors, and they do happen. Want to look at peripheral support. Can we run other devices off of this media player? That might include a serial or RS-232 port. Number of outputs. A lot of players have a single output. Many players these days have multiple outputs. 2 and 4 are probably the most common multi-output players. And last but not least, heat mitigation, using a fan or without a fan. Fanless players tend to have complicated heat sinks and integrated cases to mitigate heat. And a lot of that has to do with the environments you're in. So on to the party here, Brian.
Great. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. And the title of this session is Selecting the Right Media Player. So let's get into that. Chronologically, and Rich, we'll start with you on this one. Chronologically, when do you suggest making media player decisions in terms of an overall decision process with a new system or an upgrade to a system?
Well, you got to start with the software and the usage requirements. If you pick a media player that can't support the software, you've failed immediately. So, I mean, the software decision has to come first. And tied with that software decision is you need to define your objectives and your outcomes and how you're going to measure effectiveness and so on and so forth. Because if you just say, I want to play a banner, and you go to the software companies, and they all say, yeah, we can do that. You just need this. But then all of a sudden you get another stakeholder in the company and the organization says, well, I want to stream a video, or I want to have a live website, or I want this, I want this. You've got to get all of that stuff decided. So it's deciding all your use cases, getting all them together, picking your software, because 9 out of 10 times your software is going to dictate the media player anyways, because they're either going to have a media player that's already designed and purposely driven by them, or they're going to come to you and say, well, you can choose between these three. Where everyone's failed is they immediately go, well, I have a contract with HP. I'm going to go buy an HP computer. I'm going to put that behind my monitor, preferably a Sony, but they're going to put it behind their monitor. And then I'm going to go find a software company to run on this. Well, that doesn't work that way. That would be just like saying I'm going to buy a car without any wheels or an engine, and then I'm just going to get the chassis and then decide from there. So you have to really start at the software and the use case before you even get to a media player. And same with the screen. You've got to get all that stuff done before you even get to the sexy external parts.
Great. Jacqueline or Ken, any comment on that?
Yeah, lots
Ken?
of comments.
Sure. Go ahead,
No.
Jacqueline. You go first.
Yeah, I mean,
No, it's cool.
I think you hit the head with that, Rich. One of the things that we see most frequently is not having a content strategy, and that actually determines the overall success of a digital signage project. So when you start doing that rehaul, I mean, everyone has some kind of plan that they have in the back of their mind, but one factor that I think people overlook is ROI on your project. Kind of like what you said, you can have all of these dreams and you might be an HP house or a Google house, but then if you go buy that product and just try to retroactively fit with software, what you do is end up either buying brand new hardware or swapping your software license every couple of years. And ultimately that creates a worse experience for everyone. Nobody wants to have to go buy something new next year, even though we all do with our iPhones, but nobody in corporate America wants to go buy a new piece of technology because they didn't do their homework kind of the first go around. So absolutely keep in mind things like the software, the content, and ultimately making sure that that fits within your expectations of what you want in the next 3 to 5 years.
Right, great. Ken?
So yeah, I think we're pretty much all in agreement on this one, that there's a hierarchy of decisions that have to be made, and the media players pretty low on that hierarchy. It starts with network objectives, as Rich said. And what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Then it kind of cascades into content strategy. What type of content? How's it going to be mixed? Are you going to use multiple zones on a screen or a single zone? And are there going to be touch applications? Are there going to be external feeds? Are you streaming? Are you storing forward? Lots of content questions need to be answered. And I think one thing folks need to remember is that the life expectancy on a media player is probably longer than its depreciation period. It's probably 4 to 7 years, and most companies will write them off in 3 to 5. So when you're thinking about your content strategy, you need to crystal ball that a little bit, because you have to say, where am I going to be in 4 years? Am I going to move from HD to UHD? What does that mean? And how does that affect a choice on a media player? And of course, the software piece, we're all in agreement on that. And I would just reinforce that by saying, anyone, whether it's an internal person on a project or a salesperson, who comes in and tells you what player or external versus system on chip, that decision comes first, should be kicked to the curb immediately, because they're trying to think of a nice word. Just kick them to the curb. I don't have a nice word for them. So I'll do my Phil Cohen imitation. Content first. Okay.
First. Great. Great. So we have some human resource consulting going on here as well today. So thanks for that, Ken. So in terms of looking at the, you're talking about really forward-looking and predictive analysis of what you're going to need in terms of functionality. Just talk about a little bit more about the whole idea of forward thinking through the life cycle of a system. You talked about that a media player may outlive its depreciation. Well, will outlive your content strategy, and how do you factor that in? And where does that, we also have budgetary decisions and all of this. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Are you directing this one too?
Ken? Oh, sorry, Ken. Ken, we're going to go to Ken on this one.
Okay. So in terms of a life cycle, what you need to be able to support is the fact that while content strategies may change, during the life cycle of a player, you're also going to see software changes, sometimes quarterly, updates, upgrades, patches, bug fixes. You're going to see potentially operating system updates, and again, security patches and things like that come periodically. And you need to be able to support all of those. And as Rich said before, more often than not, your choice of content management systems is going to inform your choice of players, right? So some content management systems will give you a choice of operating systems, some will not. For years, everybody wanted to use ARM-based devices, and the only choice there for a long time was Android. We tried for a long time to get Linux on ARM. Finally did it, but I guess the point is, in terms of life cycle, you need to be able to support that. And I think sometimes when we get into the system on chip versus external media player discussion, the screens have a longer life cycle in general than the media players. The media players, not only do they electronically become obsolete, sometimes they technologically become obsolete. You can get better, faster, stronger stuff for less money 4 years out than you could today. So with the SoC architecture, you're stuck with that player, that chip, that internal architecture for the life of that display, which will often be 6 or 7 years, depending on your usage rate, brightness, and all other types of things. So those are things to think about in terms of life cycle and budgets.
We lose Brian. And Brian freeze on us? Oh, maybe I'll add.
No, we're unmeasured now.
What I would add into that, Kevin, is as I do this with my business as a whole, you need to do a PDCA of the whole thing, right? So you're building out your plan of what you want to do. It's that short, mid, and long-term plan. Then what you're doing is you're developing it, right? You're doing it. You're doing the do part. Every stage of the do part, though, you have to do a check. And whether you set your plan is, my plan is I'm going to deploy digital menu boards, and that's my plan. I do all that and I lay it out, and maybe 6 months from now I'm doing a check on it. How did my plan do? How did we execute it? Are there changes, right, that I need? Did I understate the media players? Did I do one media player to power 4 screens when I should have put one behind each one of them? All those things. And that check allows you then to take a step back and change if you need to, or you just keep moving forward. But you constantly are doing that. And it goes beyond even that. It goes into just making sure that you're constantly remembering that a digital signage network is a living, breathing network. It doesn't die. It doesn't stop the day you deploy it. We always talk about feed the beast. Well, your content strategies and needs today were this, but then you're now expanding it across your university, and you want to add in live video feed every time the chancellor talks, or you want to do this. You're going to have to look at not even just your media player, you got to look at the entire thing to make sure you built it the right way.
Yeah. And I actually was just thinking something when you said that right there, Rich. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I think we're going to all continually talk about this forward thinking, or what I'll call forward compatibility. But what really drives that is the fact that the content strategy for so many people is an agile and continual process. It doesn't just start with what you want to do on day one. Your content's going to change. Your strategy is going to change. So you need to make sure that you provide yourself enough bandwidth in terms of a media player, something that's robust enough to adhere to your content strategy changes, make sure that it fits that agile workflow for you. And you also, again, you just hit this, Rich. The media player and the content's not the only thing that's going to change. HTML5 is going to change, software is going to change, network requirements might change. So making sure that you pick a media player that can adhere to those changes and be flexible with those changes is ultimately going to drive success.
Great. And Jacqueline, I'm going to come back to you first on this, and then we'll go around the horn. In terms of the form of the media player, external versus internal, are any of those types of formats of the media player itself impacting these discussions you're having about the dynamic nature of a system and what you need to put in?
Yeah. So again, it kind of depends on the content strategy. When you have several hundreds to thousands of units being deployed, depending on the information that they want to display, an SoC is exactly what some clients will need. It gives them that opportunity to have basically a one-stop shop. Personally, what I love about SoC solutions is that it also gives you the capability of being able to check both media player health, content health, and display health, all from basically a one login portal, as opposed to doing things a la carte. It just gives people, again, a more centralized and single point of failure or single point of purchase really is what you're looking at there. But again, depending on the content, if you're doing touch solutions, if you're doing video walls, if you're doing robust HTML5 rendering back content, streaming features, that's when I normally see and recommend bringing in something like an external media player, something that's a little bit beefier. When you're talking about 8, 10, 12, 20 zones of content on the screen, you're going to want something detachable. And then it also gives you the capability of being able to swap out those media players. Again, just in case, as Ken said, if you didn't kick that guy to the curb at the beginning, considering those media players first, it gives you that opportunity and flexibility to swap them out later.
Well, I would just go ahead, RV. I'll let you go.
No, go ahead. I'll do after you. We got Brian frozen again. So
okay, I would just say that sometimes the discussion of external versus internal players turns into a cost of acquisition discussion, and I prefer to look at it as a cost of ownership discussion that needs to be had. And what does it cost you in terms of maintenance, in terms of capabilities, in terms of upgradability and future proofing versus getting locked in. And I know this isn't a SoC versus external panel per se, so I won't go into my usual diatribe on that. But I think that it's important to look at how the scale of it, which I think was important to mention. How many screens are in a venue? Are they together? Are we making 1x4 video walls, 1x2, 2x2? How do we do that? Can we do that with one player? Can we do it with 4 players? Do we use one in an external device like a data path device to manage the screens, or do we use software that might be in the screens? So these are all things that need to be looked at, and my view is that the external player is going to give you a lot more flexibility, and a lot of that's going to be informed by your CMS choice.
Yeah, and I think what I'll add in here, I have the pleasure of working for a display company, and I've got 20 plus years doing this. I've gotten to see it all, right? I've seen thumb drive, I've seen SoC, I've seen OPS, I've seen SDM, I've seen external, I've seen server, I've seen all those. It all goes back to my earlier comment. It's purpose driven. If you're just having a greeting board at the front of a school and all you're doing is welcoming so-and-so into the building, an SoC solution is perfectly fine. If you are adding an emergency alert, you're adding in video walls, you're adding in touch, odds are pretty good, although some of my competitors will disagree to this, odds are pretty good, SoC, not the right answer. So everything comes down to purpose driven. But one thing I'll add, and I'll go back, this will date myself back to some of the early QSR deals that we did, 15, 16, 17 years ago. And we put these massive computers because we had to, because we didn't have the computing power in the cloud like we do today. We didn't have the abilities that the software can do today. We didn't have HTML5. We didn't have all the things we have today, right? It's always that race to smaller, quicker, faster, stronger. There are some applications that an SoC 5 years ago, no way would have done that can do, but it's purpose driven. And I look at it from, it's a good, better, best strategy. And I do agree, external or an OPS, SDM that's powerful enough is a very strong answer for most enterprise platforms. And that's coming from someone who has an SoC. And we look at where that fits in the right needs. And this is where the controversy comes in, because Ken laughs because I didn't work for a company that had an SoC, so this was new for me. Some people immediately say SoC is the answer. Well, it's not necessarily. You need to define what the question is before you define the answer.
So why didn't OPS take off? Because I always thought that had promise, but for some reason, it never took off.
Well, it has.
Because you can swap them out.
Yeah, it has, but it hasn't at the scale we all thought it would, right? It's a price thing. I mean, you're dealing with a 600 plus computer versus someone with an SoC says, well, it's just part of buying my display. Right. And so what I can say, what I've seen is I think there's a lot of promise with SDM. I think there's a lot of promise with some of the stuff that BrightSign has looked at with internal. I think there's promise out there, but I think we need, as an industry, I think we need to really do a gut check on defining the right products for the right applications.
Agree with that.
But I mean, OPS is, I mean, I've always been near and dear to my heart because that's been part of my DNA for 20 years.
Interesting.
Well, gang, we have just a few minutes left. So what I'm going to see if we can do is give each of you about a minute to conclude and give your one main takeaway you hope that people listening today are going to have, and also how people can reach you, because I know people are going to have questions. So, Jacqueline, we're going to start with you.
So I hate to steal this from everyone, even though we've all said it consistently, but really the software is what you should be taking away from this. The software, the content strategy is what ultimately will define which media player, which endpoint is going to be best for a specific project. Looping in both IT and the content strategy team at the very beginning is also what will help determine success. So make sure that you have an idea of a software program that's going to be user-friendly. It's going to have the features and capabilities that you're looking for, and then start evaluating hardware that matches with the software.
Great, perfect.
Sorry, guys.
Rich, how about you?
Yeah, stop focusing on ROI and focus on ROO. Don't focus so much on the cost of acquisition as the cost of ownership, right? You're building your plan, you're developing it, you're doing a PDCA, you bring in all the stakeholders, very similar to what everyone's saying, right? But stop focusing on ROI as the answer. And the more we start focusing on that ownership and operation and objectives and everything like that, ROI comes, but don't have that as your primary focus. And to get a hold of me, I mean, I'm all over Twitter, obviously. So the Rich Ventura, you can get a hold of me pretty much all over LinkedIn. I know most people out there, but I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
Great. Thanks. Ken?
Well, I would echo what both Jacqueline and RV just said. And I would simply add that think of the media player as that well-trained dog. And the trainer of that dog are your objectives, your content strategy, and your choice on software. Understand that it's an investment that probably needs to provide you with 4 to 7 years of service and needs to be able to service your requirements 4 to 7 years out. Because the last thing you want to do is a premature renovation or replatforming of your network. You can reach me. I'm on LinkedIn with my name. Email is kgoldberg@realdigitalmedia.com or at stratacache.com. I read them both. And thanks very much, Brian. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, great, Ken. Jacqueline, thank you so much. And I think everybody's information is also below in your speaker information here. So, and as I begin to hand this back over, I also want to do a plug for what's coming up next. Our panel talked about the importance of making sure you're selecting that software first during the sort of chronological order of decision making. And we have a session coming up about selecting a digital signage CMS next with some guy named Ryan Cahoy. People may have heard about him. So we look forward to invite everybody to be part of that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, that was great. Hi, guys. Can I ask an audience question before I actually let you go for the day?
Sure.
Okay, great. So this is from Sheldon. He asked, how important is it now to have players that allow for a separate channel for in-venue music and sound so that you can have background sound that can cut out if you have a video file that has sound that like needs to override the in-venue audio channel? If that makes sense.
Who wants to take that?
That's really a two-part question because it depends on whether your video content has an audio stream. In a lot of venues, the video content will be muted, and we've had situations where we use the line out capability on the media player to run a separate channel for music that goes into the amplifier. But the ability to cut out or override the video audio track with a different audio track, like an announcement, attention Kmart shoppers or something like that, is a little more complicated and has to be done in software. And you wouldn't want to do it on a separate device. You'd want it all done on one.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of it also depends on the application and your use case too, because as we all know, retail, they play so much music, employees get sick of hearing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So it goes back to purpose driven.
Okay. Well, great. I will let you guys go now. Thank you.